Evelyn Hart was shelving bowls when Sophie said it without looking up from her phone. "We can't have an elderly house guest while I'm pregnant. We need the space." Adam stood beside his wife, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding his mother's face. "Mom, you should find another place," he added as if reporting the weather. Evelyn was 64, not fragile, and certainly not a guest. 6 months earlier, she had sold her 3-bedroom cottage to help them with the down payment on 1247 Maple. Since then, she'd slept in their converted garage, paying a modest rent, cooking dinners, running loads of laundry, and patching drywall when a shelf collapsed. She told herself it was temporary, a bridge, until they found their footing. Somewhere along the bridge, she realized she had become the footing. "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" she asked, steady. "There are great senior communities," Sophie said, voice cool. "You'd make friends your own age." The suggestion landed like a notarized eviction. Adam shifted, embarrassed but silent. He had once been the boy she raised alone, the boy whose science projects she stayed up late to proofread, and whose first apartment she painted by hand. Now he nodded at his wife's plan, as though it were a prudent budget item. Evelyn inhaled slowly, counting to 5, the way you do when a pan flashes too hot. "All right," she said. "I'll be out by the weekend." Sophie's mouth tipped in relief. Adam murmured, "Thanks, Mom." Neither noticed the slight private smile that reached Evelyn's eyes. The next 3 days moved with the purpose of a metronome. She called the landlord, whose number she had kept folded in her wallet for months, toured a bright 1-bedroom downtown, and signed a lease before lunch. The deposit came from the remainder of her cottage sale money she had once imagined using for a new porch swing at Maple Street. Instead, she booked a moving truck and boxed the life she had allowed to shrink to a garage. When the truck backed into the driveway, Adam blinked. "You found a place already. A problem is easier when it has a deadline," Evelyn said lightly. She supervised the movers, then set her key on the kitchen counter without ceremony. "Take care," she told them. "You have what you wanted, space." In her new apartment that evening, quiet, clean, and wholly hers, Evelyn unpacked a single lamp and set it aglow. The room warmed. She wasn't angry, she was done. And for the first time in months, she felt the floor beneath her belonged to her again. The first morning in her new apartment, Evelyn Hart woke to light that pooled on the ceiling like a shallow lake. For a few seconds, she didn't remember where she was. Then the quiet. No footsteps overhead, no washing machine thumping unevenly, no careful listening for door hinges reminded her. She made coffee in a small pot whose handle warmed like a polite handshake, and she carried the mug to the tiny balcony where the city sounded like distant surf. Across the street, a sycamore shed, one more patch of bark. Change, she thought, is a noise you only hear if you're standing still. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Unknown number. Evelyn Hart speaking. "Good morning, Ms. Hart. This is Maya Torres from Ellison Redevelopment. I'm calling to confirm your references. Mr. Ellison asked me to reach out." Evelyn set the mug down with care. "Of course. You worked with Theo Hart on residential rehab projects for 30 years. Maya's tone balanced cordiality with due diligence. "I worked with him, and then without him," Evelyn said, "because accuracy is a kind of respect. Electrical and finish work mostly. I'm good at seeing what a house wants to be if you stop fighting it." Maya hummed thoughtfully. "Your former contractor speaks highly of your eye for compliance details. That's what Mr. Ellison needs on this next slate of acquisitions." The word acquisitions landed like a file folder placed precisely on a desk. "And what would you need from me? Assessment walkthroughs. Notes on condition red flags before we bring in formal inspectors," Maya replied. "Flexible hours, per property stipend, plus a consulting retainer. If you're available, Mr. Ellison would like to start this week." Evelyn glanced at the moving boxes stacked against the wall. Their thick black letters, sewing cookbooks. Kitchen, sending their steady domestic messages. "I'm available," she said. "I can start tomorrow." "Excellent," Maya said. There's a property he once prioritized, 1247 Maple Street. The address floated up like something written on the underside of a leaf. Evelyn did not look away from it. Yes, she said evenly. I'm familiar. After the call, she washed the mug and stood for a moment with her hands under the warm water. She had been careful, even in the heat of humiliation, not to burn bridges she might need later. Now there was a bridge to walk. That afternoon, she met Grant Ellison at a cafe 3 blocks from Maple Street. He looked exactly like a man whose calendar lived in 15-minute units, early 40s, neat shave, the calm carriage of someone for whom numbers usually obeyed. He stood when she arrived. "Ms. Hart," he said, extending a hand. "Grant, it's good to finally meet in person. Maya speaks highly of your references, and I appreciate the opportunity," Evelyn said, shaking his hand. She noticed the twine of a callus at the base of his thumb, the mark of a person who still occasionally carried wood. They sat. He slid a tablet across the table. The screen displayed parcel maps like a patchwork quilt. "This section," he said, zooming in on a cluster of streets. "The city's approved road, sewer, and fiber upgrades along this spine. We'll be renovating select homes to match the infrastructure and market demand. Done right, values across the area will rise. We prefer to purchase before construction starts to minimize disruption for sellers. And done wrong." Evelyn asked, not as a challenge, but as a calibration. He smiled. "We don't do wrong, but we do move quickly. Families with unpermitted alterations often prefer to sell into certainty rather than gamble on timing." Unpermitted alterations. The phrase trod the room with purposeful shoes. Evelyn folded her hands. "Maple Street," she said. "There are at least 2 garage conversions on that block. One of them, 1247, was done without permits. The finish looks tidy at first glance. It isn't. The electrical box bears the signature of a hobbyist, not a licensed electrician." Grant wrote something in a notebook he'd slid from his jacket pocket. "Not a tablet now, paper." "How do you know?" Evelyn met his eye. "I lived there. Temporarily, I helped retrofit the space to be safer, but the paperwork was never pursued. I offered to rectify it. That offer was declined." "By the owners?" he asked. "By the circumstances," she said, and left it at that. Grant nodded once, a small bow of understanding, without appetite for gossip. "If you were advising the owners, what would you suggest?" "Bring it up to code immediately," she said. "It's cheaper than pretending the city won't notice when the block becomes a construction site. But they'll have to choose. Their savings are thin. They may prefer cash in hand." Grant tapped the pen's cap against the notebook, a tiny metronome of decision. "I'd like to make an offer today. Cash. 30-day close. We'll schedule a walkthrough to signal seriousness. You're comfortable accompanying me?" "I'm comfortable doing my job," Evelyn said. He grinned. "Good answer." They spent an hour mapping the choreography, who would speak, when which documents would be set gently on the coffee table like harmless birds, which phrases would be honest but not cruel. Evelyn appreciated the care. She believed in consequences, not in theater. They walked to Maple Street together. The neighborhood wore late afternoon like a fitting jacket. Dogs dragging their owners 2 houses farther than usual. A boy on a scooter making precise arcs in the dust along the curb. A neighbor hosing a car and rinsing yesterday off the concrete. At 1247, the small maple out front had pushed a new crown of leaves since spring, a green echo of stubbornness. Evelyn registered the details the way a carpenter reads studs. Hairline cracks at the sidewalk edge. Soil was settling a dent in the garage door. Someone had backed carelessly, a fresh nest in the eaves. Birds moved in where inspectors had not. Through the window, she saw Sophie see them. Sophie's face froze, then rearranged itself into a social expression as she disappeared toward the peephole. Adam answered the door, his shirt wrinkled sleep, riding his eyes like a tide line. "Can I help you?" he asked, guarded. Grant stepped forward, offered a card. Grant Ellison Redevelopment. This is Evelyn Hart, our property assessment consultant. We'd like to discuss a business proposition regarding your home. May we come in? Adam's gaze flicked from the card to his mother, and then back as if language had briefly abandoned him. He stepped aside. In the living room, the afternoon made a trapezoid of light on the rug, the same rug on which Evelyn had once set warm plates. Sophie stood behind the couch, one hand at the small of her back, as if readying herself to lift something that would prove heavy. Grant didn't loiter. "I'll be direct," he said, opening a folder on the coffee table. "We're prepared to offer $450,000 cash, closing in 30 days. We're also willing to assist with transition plans if you choose to relocate before the city's infrastructure work begins." Sophie made a small sound that ended in a swallow. Adam, after a second, found words. "We're not looking to sell." "I understand," Grant said. "We're not pressuring. We're presenting timing. The city's construction schedule will bring noise access restrictions and formal permit review. We prefer to get ahead of that. Your block shows several unpermitted modifications, and the city's process, fair as it is, can be inconvenient and expensive." Evelyn watched her son's throat work. He was good at many things, but poker was never one of them. What modifications, Adam asked, though he knew. The way a person asks a doctor to say the word out loud so the room will believe it exists. The garage conversion, Grant said, tone courteous, as if naming a neighbor's dog. "It presents well, but we've seen the pattern often. When upgrades follow infrastructure, inspectors knock. It's better to control the sequence." Sophie found her voice. "What kind of decision deadline are you thinking?" Grant checked his phone's calendar. "We break ground in 6 weeks. After that, living through the work will be challenging. Our offer stands through Friday. 5 days of arithmetic, 5 nights of thin sleep." He slid his card across the table. "Talk it over. Ms. Hart can answer questions about process and timing." The word Ms. Hart landed in the room with complicated weight. Evelyn had not been invited to sit in this chair when she lived in the garage. Now she sat because her work required it. The niche of the world where grief and usefulness overlap is small and oddly well lit. Adam walked them to the door because manners had learned him thoroughly in childhood. On the porch, he said quietly, "Mom." "Yes." His face was a map of old trails, paths they had walked together 100 times and then paved over with newer stories. "Did you arrange this?" "Adam," she said, "the city arranged the sequence. Mr. Ellison arranged the offer. I arranged my life around not being wanted. That's all." He stared at her for a moment, then at the card, then at the driveway where she had once swept clean a morning that didn't belong to her. After they left, Evelyn and Grant paused on the sidewalk beside the small maple tree. "That went as well as such conversations go," he said. "They heard you," she said. "Hearing and agreeing are cousins who don't always visit on the same day." Grant smiled. "True. Maya will follow up with documentation this evening. And thank you. You're steady." "Steady isn't dramatic," Evelyn said. "But it keeps roofs on." Back at her apartment, Evelyn set her clipboard on the counter and poured water into a glass with the solemn satisfaction of people who've lifted heavy things and set them down. The phone began its ceremony of buzzing. "Adam!" She stared at his name and let it gallop to voicemail. "Sophie." She let that one run too. Adam again. She breathed in then out, then answered on the third call, because not picking up forever is a young person's sport. "What is going on?" Adam said, voice pitched high, as if the room he stood in had sunk a few inches and taken his equilibrium with it. "Language," Evelyn said gently. An old reflex neither of them intended. "Say what you mean." "That man is talking about tearing up our block," he said. "He says the city will dig up the street, that inspectors will review permits." Evelyn completed, "They do, Adam. That's what they do when public infrastructure modernizes. They make sure private modifications aren't fire hazards wearing tidy paint." "We don't want to sell," he says, the words almost a plea. we just bought. This is our home. With my $40,000, she said, because truth is a chair you either sit on or you don't. Savings I won't see again. Silence widened. She could hear him breathing. She pictured him at the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, looking at the floor the way people do when they hope it will tell them a better story. "Mom," he said softer, "we messed up. She's anxious, the baby." "Don't pin this on hormones," Evelyn said. She spoke plainly. You agreed plainly. I heard you both. "So, this is revenge?" he asked, and the words sounded too large for his mouth. "No," Evelyn said, and her voice surprised her with how calm it felt, like water poured from a measured jug. "This is consequence. Consequence isn't a weapon, it's gravity. It keeps things from floating off into the story people prefer. We need help," he said. "We need time. Time is exactly what you ran out of when you decided I was temporary," she said. "I offered to help with permits once. That offer expired when my bed moved out of your garage." On another line of history, the one where he chose a different sentence at the kitchen counter, there might have been a different conversation now. This was the line they had. "I don't want anything from you," she added, and meant it in the most relieving, most sorrowful way. "Not money, not apologies to be tallied like receipts. I wanted respect. That is free to give and expensive to withhold." He said nothing. Sometimes silence is a person learning the cost of a habit. "Talk to Sophie," Evelyn said not unkindly. "Talk to Mr. Ellison. Talk to the city. Choose what you can live with." She ended the call and placed the phone face down, a small ritual of boundary setting that felt like setting a book on a shelf in the correct section. The room breathed around her. In the quiet, she made notes, maple offer presented. Owners hesitant. Follow-up Friday deadline. Compliance risk garage conversion. She wrote in neat block letters that would look sensible later, even if grief tried to smudge the edges. Her phone lit again with a text from Sophie. "Please pick up." Evelyn did not. She steeped tea. She sat by the window and watched a patch of sun walk itself down the opposite wall, then step off onto the floor. When the cup was empty, she washed it and returned it to the cabinet. The muscle memory of care exists even when the audience changes. At dusk, Maya called. "How did it go?" "They're startled," Evelyn said. Not surprised, startled. "The difference is important. I'll send the offer in writing with the Friday date," Maya said. Grant wants the neighborhood to transition without drama. "Drama doesn't come from offers," Evelyn said. "It comes from people discovering they've been living on credit in more ways than one." After the call, Evelyn pulled one of the remaining boxes to the table and opened it. Inside was the jar of buttons she had carried through every move of her life, shell plastic wood mother of pearl. She unscrewed the lid and let a few fall into her palm. When you keep buttons, you're preparing for a day when a useful thing loses the small circle that keeps it in place. The metaphor was embarrassingly apt. She returned the buttons to the jar and set it on the shelf where it caught the last of the day's light and reflected it in little moons. The second call from Adam came near 9. She didn't answer. The third near 10, she did not, because the number 3 had mystical importance, but because avoiding him started to feel like a habit with its own gravity. "We talked," he said without preface. "Sophie says the offer is predatory." "The math isn't predatory," Evelyn said. "It's generous in present conditions. You'll profit without doing the compliance work, or you can do the work and keep the house. Both are adult choices." "What would you do?" he asked. Evelyn looked at the new shadows her lamp made on the wall. "I would have done the permits months ago," she said. "But that bridge is behind you. You could still," he began. "No," she said gently, but with a door in the word. "I've moved out of that job." He swore softly, not at her, but at an equation he didn't like. "I'm scared," he said. At last and plainly. "I know," Evelyn said. "I was scared the day I sold my house to help you. I was scared the night I slept in your garage the first time and told myself it was temporary. Fear doesn't make good decisions for us. Numbers do, documents do, calendars do, he breathed. Friday, he said like a person tasting the shape of a deadline. Friday, she agreed. When the call ended, the room was as it had been a reasonable place for a person to live. Evelyn stood and stretched, feeling her shoulders click softly like beads sliding home on a string. She turned off the lamp. In the dark, she could still see the outline of the window. The city hummed. Somewhere, a neighbor laughed. In the small country of her apartment, borders were clear and customs polite. She slept. Morning brought ordinary instructions. Buy curtain rods, schedule an inspection for a different property on Maya's list. Return the library books that had ridden in a box since winter. Ellison Redevelopment sent the formal offer, clean, succinct, respectful. Grant texted, "Thank you for yesterday. You make difficult rooms easier." She answered, "You're welcome. Facts help." By noon, the messages began again, their tempo faster now. "Sophie, can we talk, Adam?" "Please answer." She didn't. Instead, she walked to Maple Street alone and stood across from the house without crossing over. A delivery truck idled 2 doors down. A woman watered a potted fern as if it might wander off unsupervised. A crow scolded the world from a light pole. At 12:47, blinds shifted, then stilled. Houses have nervous systems. They remember the temperature of voices. She went home. She made a second cup of coffee at an hour when coffee was more custom than chemistry. She opened her notebook and wrote a sentence that would have sounded pompous if she hadn't earned it the long way: "I am not in charge of other people's lessons." Under it, she wrote, "My job is to tell the truth without cruelty and to refuse assignments that ask me to disappear." The phone rang again in the late afternoon. She let it. When it stopped, she breathed in the restored quiet as if it were air she had baked herself. At sunset, Grant called. "Quick update. Your son reached out." Evelyn closed her eyes for a heartbeat, and "He asked about payment plans for code compliance," Grant said. "I explained our timeline. The city's process doesn't bend to installment schedules." "No," Evelyn said. "Gravity doesn't do layaway." "He was emotional," Grant added, tactful. "He said family should help family." "Family helps family," Evelyn said, when help is a two-way street. On Friday morning, the apartment felt like a held breath. Evelyn changed the sheets because fresh cotton makes waiting less foolish. She made a list. She bought groceries. She wrote curtains at the top of a sticky note, and then because it pleased her, she underlined the word twice. At 11, her phone vibrated with a message from Maya. "No decision yet," from 12:47. They know the deadline. At 1, a number she recognized but hadn't saved Sophie's flashed again. Evelyn set the phone in a drawer and closed it gently. Drawers are for things that need to be somewhere for a while. At 3, she opened the window and let the soft, leaf-heavy air come in. She didn't think about the garage. She didn't think about the kitchen where she had once lined up plates like offerings. She thought about curtain rods and a neighbor's dog and the way light travels across a room like a careful tourist, making sure to see everything before it goes. By evening, the choice would be made. By evening, consequences would be doing their honest work. Evelyn's part in this chapter was simple and at last appropriately small. Hold the line, tell the truth, and keep the lamp ready for whatever the next room would need. On Friday morning, the city felt as if it were holding its breath. From her small balcony, Evelyn Hart watched a sparrow try 3 times to lift a twig longer than its body. Persistence, she thought, is just expertise in smaller increments. The twig finally angled right. The bird rose. Evelyn set down her cup and went inside to strip the bed. Fresh sheets make waiting less foolish. By 11, the house on Maple Street had not called. Ellison Redevelopment's offer letter was already in Adam and Sophie's inboxes, courteous sentences carrying numbers like well-stacked dishes, $450,000 cash, 30-day close. support with logistics if they relocated before utility work began in 6 weeks, offer valid through Friday. Evelyn knew the math would force a decision even if pride tried to delay it. The city's process was a metronome. It did not care for improvisation. Her phone lit with another message from Adam. "Can we please talk?" She placed the phone face down. Boundaries are not walls. They're doors with locks you decide when to turn. At noon, there was a knock. Evelyn looked through the peephole and saw her son and his wife in a shape she had never seen them take, shoulders tilted inward, like people sheltering from weather they had not predicted. She opened the door but did not widen it with an invitation. "Mom," Adam said, already somewhere between apology and panic. Evelyn Sophie added quickly, as if the right salutation might reset something. "Come in," Evelyn said at last, letting the door swing open. She gestured toward the small table. When they sat, she set water in front of them because a person can be generous without volunteering for rescue. Adam, elbows on knees, looked as though he might ask to borrow her patience. "We don't know what to do." Ellison's offer is real, Evelyn said, "and generous for your timing." "We can't sell," Sophie said, and then softer. "We just bought our crib." "I know," Evelyn said. "I also know the city will ask about your garage conversion the minute the street is a construction site. You can sell or you can bring it up to code. You can't do neither." Adam rubbed his face. "We can't afford permits and rewiring. Not now." Evelyn rose, walked to her small desk, and returned with a thin manila folder. She set it on the table like a loaf of bread, ordinary, sustaining. "There's something you should see." Sophie's gaze flicked between Evelyn's face and the folder, as if the envelope were a live animal. Adam opened it. Inside were copies of notices from City Infrastructure and Compliance, a friendly letter from Noah Patel, a licensed electrician, a handwritten schedule, 2 weeks, 8,000 permit. Filing on day 3, rough inspection on day 9, final sign-off at the end. There was also a receipt for a permit application Evelyn had started under the prior owner's forwarding address, paused when certain facts changed. Adam read the first page twice. This was mailed to the previous owners, he said, voice brittle, and forwarded through their agent to, You've had these. For 6 weeks, Evelyn said. I asked you in February about permits. I offered to handle them. I arranged to pay $8,000 and make it my moving out gift, clean title, clean conscience. I canceled when you made me temporary. That gift makes sense only if I belong in the picture. Sophie traced a line on the folder with one finger, a nervous motion that left no mark. So you could fix it, she said, not a question, more like a small accusation. I could have Evelyn answered. I won't. Not now. I'm not the person you hired for your life. I won't volunteer as staff. The words found their places in the air, like birds landing on a wire. Adam stared at the receipts, a flush rising to his jaw as if facts had the temperature of shame. He closed the folder, then opened it again, as if the second time the papers might admit to collusion with bad luck. I want you to hear something clearly, Evelyn said. This is not revenge. This is the order of things. I gave you money because I loved you. I lived in your garage because I believed in a bridge. When you asked me to move, I complied. Consequences are not a weapon. They're what happens when people live in time. Sophie swallowed. We're scared, she said, the words untidy and honest. I know, Evelyn said softer. I was scared when I sold my house. Scared when I slept on a bed under a high garage window and told myself it was temporary. But fear doesn't revise a calendar. You can sell and pocket a profit, or you can fix the problem and keep the house. Call Mr. Ellison if you want to negotiate dates. Call Noah if you want a permit plan. They will both answer. I won't solve it for you. The room quieted. Outside, a delivery truck hissed to a stop at the curb. A driver heaved a package and moved on. Life continued whole, indifferent. Sophie looked at her hands. I said things I shouldn't have, she murmured. You said what you meant, Evelyn replied. That's the part that taught me. I'm not asking for new sentences. I'm asking for new habits." They left with the manila folder. The apartment, once the door closed, felt a measure larger. Evelyn stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists. The shock steadied the hummingbird inside her chest. By late afternoon, the calls started again, angrier now pressure, borrowing the voice of urgency. Evelyn let the first ring through to voicemail. The second, too. She let the third start and then answered, "Because you can be firm without practicing cruelty. Mom." Adam said, skipping any attempt at civility, "Sophie's parents are coming over. They think this developer is extorting us. Her dad knows people. He was on a council subcommittee years ago." "That's one way to spend a Friday," Evelyn said. "Do you even care if we're pushed out of our home?" "I do," she said. Enough to tell the truth when lies would be easier. He exhaled loud in the receiver. "You're different," he said, sounding surprised. "I stopped being the person who disappeared so you could feel comfortable," she said. "I recommend the experience." The call ended in the weight of things a person can't say yet. Evening rolled in like a coat that fit better than the afternoons. The next morning, Saturday, the knock at Evelyn's door was brisk, polite, and purposeful, as if the knocker had once written procedure manuals for disagreements. Through the peephole, she saw a man and woman in their 60s, Peter and Nadine Caldwell, Sophie's parents. Evelyn opened the door and stepped aside. Some courtesies belong to the host, even when the history is awkward. "Ms. Hart." Peter said, the handshake already in his posture. "I appreciate you seeing us." "Nadine." The woman added a quick, warm smile that didn't linger. They declined water. They sat. Peter used the voice of a former official, no sharp edges, all agenda. "Sophie called. She's upset. She says a developer has been pressuring them to sell and that you are involved. I'm employed by Ellison Redevelopment as a property assessment consultant," Evelyn said. "Simple nouns have their own armor. I identified properties already flagged by the city because of the upcoming public works. Ellison made a cash offer with a clear timeline. Pressure is a big word. It doesn't fit here." Nadine's brow pinched. "Sophie said you were angry about leaving and that this is personal." "I was hurt," Evelyn said evenly, "and I adjusted my behavior. That's personal. Ellison's offer is business. The city's construction schedule is civic. Those three things keep their lanes." Peter leaned forward. "May I ask why you didn't tell them about these notices earlier?" Evelyn fetched the folder she had loaned the day before. "Because I intended to fix it without making the baby's gestation a referendum on building code," she said, not unkindly. "It would have cost $8,000 and 2 weeks. I planned it as a gift. When I discovered I was a guest in a place I had helped buy, I took my gifts with me." Nadine read in delicate gulps like a person eating soup too hot. "She called you old," Nadine said finally, the word wilting in her mouth. "She called me temporary," Evelyn corrected quietly. That one hurt more. Peter's jaw tightened with a parent's fury. "We raised her to respect people. I don't know this version of her." "Comfort rearranges people," Evelyn said. "Being needed does too. It is not always an improvement." Peter looked at the papers again, then at Evelyn. "What would you consider a path forward, not just for permits, for family?" Evelyn considered. The question was honest. It deserved more than a slogan. "A path where words match actions," she said at last. "Where I am not invited to be help and then named burden. Where apologies are not down payments on favors. Where boundaries are not treated as insults." She paused. "That's not a plan. It's a practice." Peter nodded slowly. "And the developer, Grant Ellison, is competent and careful," she said. "He doesn't need theatrics to make a sale. If you file a complaint based on a story that doesn't match the facts, you'll delay the inevitable and cost the city time." Peter's mouth twitched. "Time," he said. "The only currency we can't print." They stood to go. At the door, Nadine hesitated. "For what it's worth," she said, "you're right to ask for respect. We'll talk to them." "Thank you," Evelyn said. Talking is where change starts. It is rarely where it ends. She watched them walk down the hall posture, already reshaping around the conversations they would carry home like fragile bowls. Monday hummed along until just before lunch, when Evelyn's phone announced itself with a number she didn't recognize and a tone she did. Ms. Hart. This is Dana Whitaker with Lakeside Bank. I'm Mr. Mitchell's mortgage officer. He listed you as an emergency contact. Evelyn leaned a hip against the counter. Is he all right? He is, Dana said. He requested a home equity line to cover some unexpected work. During appraisal, our assessor flagged a non-permitted conversion. We can't proceed without code compliance. Mr. Mitchell indicated you might facilitate that. The old choreography of expectation tried to rise in Evelyn's muscles, a well-worn dance. She exhaled and kept her voice polite. I can't assist with that project. A pause papers moving on a desk. I see. He was quite certain you had arrangements already. I did, Evelyn said. I canceled them when I moved out. Another pause, this one less administrative. Understood. Thank you for your time. Evelyn ended the call and stared at the blank screen, its calm face. She waited for the anger to arrive. Instead, a cooler feeling came the reshaped space where a bad habit used to live. 10 minutes later, Adam called. Dana says you refused to help. I corrected a misunderstanding, Evelyn said. You told me you had it all set up. The $8,000, the electrician, everything. I did. When I was part of your home, she said. I'm not. The arrangement expired when I turned in my key. This is madness, he snapped. You're ruining us over hurt feelings. Adam, she said, letting the name be the bridge. It could be. I spent $40,000 from my retirement, so you could have a house sooner. I cooked, I laundered. I kept quiet in rooms that belonged to me and didn't. I don't have hurt feelings. I have data. I have a calendar. I have boundaries I should have set earlier. Silence opened. It wasn't empty. It was full of learning. What do you want from us? He asked at last, quiet. Less, she said. Do this without me. By Wednesday, the air in the neighborhood changed the way it does when garbage day moves for a holiday. Conversations on porches paused when white SUVs rolled by. A rumor moved faster than mail. Just before 3, Grant Ellison called. We have a complication, he said. The city compliance office received a formal complaint alleging intimidation in our acquisitions. It was filed by Peter Caldwell. Evelyn closed her eyes. Sometimes knowledge arrives not as surprise, but as confirmation. Sophie's father. Yes, Grant said. He's well connected. The city will investigate. What does that mean for your work? Evelyn asked. Interviews, document review. A pause, not a stop, he said. They will also want to speak with you. An hour later, a new number appeared, Detective Anya Park City Planning Compliance. We'd like to schedule an interview regarding your consulting work with Ellison. The voice was composed, intelligent, and not looking for performance. Of course, Evelyn said. I'm available today. City Hall's conference room smelled faintly of lemon cleanser and patience. Detective Park was younger than Evelyn expected, with a precise hairstyle that suggested she trusted a mirror to tell the truth. She set a recorder on the table but began without it. Ms. Hart, she said, tell me how you came to work for Ellison Redevelopment. Evelyn told the story simply a conversation with Maya Torres, a meeting with Grant, a job description that fit her competencies like a well-worn glove, an apartment whose rent she could afford without bargaining with her pride, and your relationship to 1247 Maple Street. My son and daughter-in-law own it, she said. I lived there briefly. I helped make a non-permitted garage conversion safer. I offered to bring it to code on my own dime. I was asked to move. I canceled my arrangements and accepted employment where my skills were wanted. Detective Park flipped a page in her notebook. Did you target the property for acquisition because of a family dispute? I identified it as a candidate because the city had already flagged the block for upgrades, Evelyn said. Ellison made an offer the city would have forced into a decision anyway. I didn't create the problem. I stopped preventing it. Some might call that revenge, Detective Park said, voice neutral. Some might call it not enabling, Evelyn returned. I gave accurate information to a buyer operating within the law. The city's records will show notice was sent. If you'd like, I can produce copies of my correspondence with a licensed electrician. Detective Park's mouth lifted, not quite a smile. Please do. She paused. Off the record, family disputes are messy. Off the record, Evelyn said so is plaster. If you punch a wall, you still have to patch it. They spoke for 2 hours. The questions were specific and fair. The answers, too. When it was over, Detective Park walked Evelyn to the stairs. We'll conclude quickly, she said. You've been helpful. Helpful without being used, Evelyn said. I'm learning the difference. 3 days later, a sunrise text from Grant Investigation closed. No coercion, complaint withdrawn. 10 minutes after that, a call. City says our processes are solid, he said. Relief tucked discreetly behind professionalism. Ms. Park sent a note thanking us for our documentation. And Caldwell called to apologize for the detour. How very civic of him, Evelyn said, allowing herself one dry smile. That afternoon, there was another knock. Adam and Sophie stood in the hallway, looking as if someone had wrung them and hung them out to dry. Evelyn opened the door and waited. Apologies cannot be prompted like errands. We owe you an apology, Adam said, a sentence he had practiced and still barely got right. Several, Sophie added, voice thin. Evelyn gestured toward the table again and set water in front of them because rituals exist to hold people together while they figure out new words. My parents told us what you tried to do, Sophie said, staring at her glass. How you arranged everything, how you planned to pay, how we made ourselves comfortable with your usefulness and then told you to take up less space. We threw you away, Adam said, choosing the cruelly precise phrasing himself for once. You did, Evelyn said. Naming a thing correctly is the first tool in any repair kit. Can you forgive us? Sophie asked. A tiny tremor moved through the syllables. Evelyn looked at these two people she knew and didn't. I can, she said after a long breath. But understand, forgiveness doesn't grant back the jobs you removed me from. I won't be your quiet fixer. If we are family, it must be on new terms. We want that, Adam said. We just don't know how to. Start with respect, Evelyn said. Practice it when it's inconvenient, not just when it buys you something. And when you're stressed, don't choose the person with the softest target on her back. They nodded the kind of nod people give when they're making a contract with themselves. What will you do about the house? She asked. Sophie glanced at Adam. We talked to Maya. We're going to sell. We'll make enough to buy smaller in a neighborhood we can actually afford. We'll start over without debt eating our sleep. Evelyn felt something inside her loosen, not triumph, not sorrow, an old rope untying without splinters. That sounds like adulthood, she said. They stood to go, and at the door, Adam turned. We want you in our child's life, he said, earnest, in a way that made him look temporarily younger. Not as a resource as family. We'll see, Evelyn said. Not coy, just accurate. Sometimes trust comes back the way grass does. It doesn't respond to speeches. It responds to consistent weather. The sale moved the way a clean file moves essential papers. Signatures that look more legible than usual because people are trying to impress the future. Ellison redevelopment closed in 30 days. After paying off their mortgage and costs, Adam and Sophie walked away with roughly $60,000. They bought a smaller place across town, a 2-bedroom with a thin lemon tree in the yard that would with time and patience learn to fruit. Evelyn visited a week after they moved in, carrying a bag with olive oil, good vinegar, and a loaf of bread. The living room was arranged as if the couch were deciding whom to trust. Boxes were stacked like promises. Sophie made tea and did not try to fuss. Adam opened the window because the room wanted air. They talked about curtain rods and outlets and how to anchor a toddler's dresser to the wall. No one mentioned garages. It was a conversation made of small stones laid carefully across water. The baby. Eva Nadine Hart Caldwell arrived in late summer, a sturdy little person who yawned as if she were practicing for operas. Evelyn came by with food because love still enjoys casseroles and because food has no subtext if you don't tie one to it. She washed a few dishes, not because they couldn't, but because sometimes the truest help is the quiet kind that leaves before gratitude becomes a script. A month later, on a Wednesday with rain that didn't commit, Adam knocked on Evelyn's door alone. He held 2 envelopes. "I wanted you to see these," he said. One was a letter from Lakeside Bank, closing out their loan with thanks for prompt payment. The other was a printout of their budget. There were no heroics in the numbers, just the ordinary competence of people who have decided to live within. He didn't ask for praise. He didn't need it. "I'm proud of this," Evelyn said, tapping the paper lightly. "So am I," he said, and the humility didn't sound like a costume. They ate soup at her small table and talked about a neighbor's cat who seemed to have 2 names depending on which porch he visited. When Adam left, he folded her into a hug he did not assume. She let him. The seasons turned and acquired their usual business leaves, then lights, then the resolution to walk more than actually walking. Ellison's crews arrived at Maple Street. Orange cones multiplied. The old block began to look like the inside of a project plan. Evelyn inspected other houses for the company she wore boots to crawl spaces and carried a flashlight that remembered every cobweb. She liked the work you tell the truth about wood and wire and leave people freer to decide. Peter Caldwell phoned in November. "I wanted to say thank you," he said without wind-up, "for telling us the truth, for not letting us use you as a shortcut." "You withdrew your complaint," Evelyn said. "Yes," he said. "We talked to Sophie. She listened. We're repairing from our side." "Good," Evelyn said. "Repair is contagious if you let it be." On a winter afternoon, Evelyn sat on her balcony with a blanket across her lap and watched the sycamore hold onto a handful of leaves the wind was trying to borrow. Her phone buzzed. A photo baby, Eva, in a knitted hat. Cheeks like declarations, brown eyes focused on something just off camera. Beneath it, a simple caption from Sophie. "Come for dinner." We made too much. There was no subtext in the question, no trap. Evelyn typed, "I'll bring bread," and pressed send. Dinner was humble and good stew salad, the bread she'd promised. They ate without auditioning their goodness. Afterward, they sat on the floor and made a tower of blocks that Eva toppled with scientific precision. She laughed so hard her socks tried to escape her feet. When the baby reached arms out and said clear as a bell, Nana Evelyn's eyes burned. She lifted the child and kissed her soft hair and let that one word settle in the room like a certificate. Time did the work that slogans can't. There were weeks when no one called and nothing was wrong. There were Saturdays when Evelyn took Eva to the library and returned her on time with oatmeal on her sweater. There were small missteps that didn't metastasize into old patterns because someone would say lightly, "That feels like the past," and the other person would stop and try a different fork in the road. A year after the sale, they gathered at Evelyn's apartment for cake, because you can rename any day with frosting. Adam brought flowers that didn't apologize for anything. Sophie brought a photo for Evelyn's wall, Eva, in a park squinting at a pigeon, as if she were thinking of hiring it. They ate, they cleaned up together, and at the end, when Adam lingered, he said, "I know we can't erase the first part of this story." "We wouldn't want to," Evelyn said. "It taught us where the load-bearing walls are." He nodded. "Thank you for not saving us when that would have been easier." "It was never easier," Evelyn said. "It was familiar." Familiar isn't always good. After they left, Evelyn washed the plates and set them to dry. The apartment made its small, satisfied noises. She turned on her lamp, the first object she had placed in the new place, and the room warmed like a memory that behaves. She thought about the day the complaint had been filed, the day Detective Park had asked about revenge, the day Dana had called the morning Grant had texted. She thought about the baby saying Nana about Noah's estimate, sitting folded in a drawer like a souvenir from a country she had chosen not to live in. People think the opposite of revenge is forgiveness. Sometimes the opposite of revenge is simply refusing to keep erasing yourself. Evelyn took her tea to the balcony. Somewhere down the block, a dog suggested it was time for everyone to consider walking. She smiled. She no longer swept a driveway that wasn't hers in the mornings. She no longer rehearsed a place in a story that treated her as a footnote. She knew the smell of her own hallway, the sound her door made when it latched the exact way afternoon leaned across her table in winter. She had work she liked and a family that was smaller but sturdier, a practice of respect growing like a hedge that would, if trimmed and watered, shape the wind. Below, someone pushed a stroller with the ease of a person who had discovered the secret of doing one thing at a time. Above, the sky folded itself into evening without hurry. Evelyn finished her tea and set the cup on the railing in a spot where the sun, when it returned tomorrow, would paint it briefly gold. That was enough. That was everything. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.